This program is made possible in part by the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, one of America's top research universities, preparing students for today's interdependent world with internationally focused academic and outreach programs. The Institute of World Affairs at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee presents International Focus, a weekly discussion of the people and events behind today's global headlines. Now, here's your host, Doug Savage.
Welcome to International Focus. In our digital age, the diverse media pipelines through which information flows have become critical strategic assets. In the U.S. and societies around the world, we've witnessed the profound and corrosive effect injecting false information into this stream has on the democratic process. Our guest today is well placed to help us explore efforts to weaponize media and suggest some things that we can do to protect the information environment. Diana Priest is a two-time Pulitzer Prize winning reporter for the Washington Post. Her award-winning work has included stories on the Pentagon, intelligence agencies, veterans issues, and Russian disinformation. She is also author of two best-selling books, The Mission, Waging War and Keeping Peace with America's Military, and Top Secret America, The Rise of the National Security State. In addition, she also serves as the Knight Chair in Public Affairs Journalism at the University of Maryland's Merrill College of Journalism. Diana Priest, welcome to International Focus.
Thank you. It's great to be here, Doug.
Well, I'm wondering if we could start out with a quote from, appropriately enough, Mark Zuckerberg. He was speaking at a conference just 2 days after the election of Donald Trump, and he said, I'm quoting here, "I think the idea that fake news on Facebook, of which it is a very small amount of the content, influenced the election in any way is a pretty crazy idea." So, do you think it was genuine naivete at that point or something else?
I think he does this frequently, where he says one thing and then either learns another thing or someone else outs him and says, well, that's not really true. Do you want to restate that? In this case, I don't think that Facebook had been looking at their own platform in the way that they say they do. You know, they have their own internal rules. It's sort of like their constitution. They call it the community standards, and actually it's available online. A lot of what Facebook does is hidden, but their standards is not. And so they say that they didn't know and they weren't seeing patterns that other people, other researchers that didn't have the whole tools to discover what Facebook was putting on their platform had, until there was enough pressure from the U.S. government saying, no, we know that this is happening, and from legislators and from the media that were looking at other researchers and other journalists in other parts of the world who were watching the Russians carry out their operation. Then he was pretty much forced to go and look at Facebook and say, is it possible, and how do we find out? And lo and behold, they found that there were thousands of ads. It didn't amount to a lot of money in the Facebook money bank. It was about $10 million that the Russian government, through a group called the Internet Research Agency in St. Petersburg, Russia, used to try to do various things in the election that, according to our intelligence services, were meant to sway voters to vote for Trump over his opponent, Hillary Clinton.
Well, and this is something you're not unfamiliar with. You were involved in the Frontline segment on Facebook, the Facebook Dilemma, and reviewing that program, the Wall Street Journal said, the blissfully amoral way a social media site has morphed into a socio-political evil. So, first of all, are they amoral, and are they socio-political evil?
Well, I don't think I want to use those terms when it comes to a multinational company that has a lot of resources at its disposal, but I will say that it is not, in my view, what the corporate leader Mr. Zuckerberg wants us to believe that it is. They have a fabulous marketing campaign. I think his T-shirt is part of that, his one T-shirt that he wears over and over, not really, to say that this is a platform primarily to connect with your friends and family. Well, it may have started out that way, but once it became a public company, publicly traded, its incentive really changed into making the most profit possible, like any other multinational company in the world. And it's, not, if not the most profitable, one of the most profitable. And when it made that decision, it created a business model, things that had to be added to its machine, as I like to call it, that in my mind and other people who have looked at this, did corrupt what it initially says it was set out to do. And I can explain that, I think, pretty simply and quickly, I hope. But that included being able to sell ads is the way they make money. And they have created this amazing way to sell ads to a business that at a fraction of the cost of other ads. And the way they do that is they get information about you, not just from Facebook, from everything you do on the web, from where you go if you have an iPhone, from other types of purchases you make. So it knows probably more about you than you know about yourself. And then it uses that to give you information in your news feed and ads that is going to attract you emotionally and keep you looking at the page where those ads are. And then it can be used to micro-target a certain segment of the population to manipulate them in ways that, frankly, they don't know they're being manipulated. And of course, we know from a lot of the studies that have been done and reporting that have been done around the world that it is also used by bad actors to do bad things. And the worst that was done so far that we know about is it was used by the extremist Buddhists in Myanmar, formerly Burma, to incite a genocide against the Muslim minority, the Rohingya. And the United Nations found that Facebook facilitated that genocide. That news came along in the midst of all of our election hoopla in 2016 and 17 and really didn't get a lot of attention. But that's a pretty big charge for a company that likes to portray itself as connecting you with your friends and family.
Well, in this country at least, 2016 and the election seem to be the watershed, but you've made the point elsewhere that what was going on with the Russians had not begun in 2016 with the U.S. election. Are there other parts of the world where perhaps we should have seen some red flags going into it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it wasn't this information that the Russian operations date back to 2007 in Georgia and in the other Baltic nations. And the fact that that was happening was not a secret because they had some very smart researchers, computer scientists, and journalists who were outing this fact and writing about it and then studying it. So the literature on this is available if you want to look at it way back then. And it continued and it sort of marched across Central Europe, well, into Ukraine and then Hungary and Poland, and then even right before the U.S. election in the referendum in Scotland, and the Brexit vote. So it was happening overseas. People were writing about it overseas. And then we had this very interesting case in 2014 in the United States that was documented by the New York Times of a Russian hoax in, of all places, a small town in Louisiana, where they were actually testing whether they could carry it out here. And so you had a lot of reporting and research being done, but I guess the U.S. government was not really paying attention to that, and the media here certainly wasn't. It wasn't until it gets here in 2016, really, that people become aware of the fact and start looking backwards in other places in the world and discover that all this is going on. And so today, we can look at we have the government, the Congress asked certain companies that are really good at doing this analysis to look at the data that it forced Facebook to give them, and Twitter. Twitter was more open about it, about the Russian ad buys, and then to analyze it and look at what did they buy, what were they trying to do, what were their messages, what was their methodology. So we actually know a lot about the way they operated in 2016.
Well, let's take a step back and look at just sort of the nature of social media. Thinking back in the era of, although I'm not fond of the term, the Arab Spring, and it was seen as the great convening force that allowed people to mount these mass protests, and it didn't take the regimes long to figure out something was going on.
Right. Well, it took them long enough so that in 2010, when it all started, there were really these amazing, they were truly revolutionaries, young people who knew how to use Facebook and Twitter and other media there, and they started organizing the masses on those things, on those platforms. It was even surprising to them how much they were able to do. It got people out in Tahrir Square, it got them out in Tunisia, it literally felled the Mubarak in Egypt, moved across to Yemen and almost into Saudi Arabia, not quite, before it was put down. Syria really created this wave of revolution that surprised everybody, I think. But as you said, well, the regimes were very surprised because they didn't understand social media, as our government didn't either, as probably any person over the age of 30 didn't really. And then what happened was those governments did, with the help of Facebook, I would say, they called Facebook in. Facebook was very eager to teach everybody how to use their platform because they wanted governments to be able to communicate with their people. But many of the governments went many steps further and turned it against as a surveillance mechanism. And then I would say bad actors learned that it could be a tool to divide people rather than to unite them, because one of the elements of this machine is to create divisions and to create extremes, to take you in whatever position you are and then move you over to an extreme version of that, because that's what you'll stay on the page longer looking at, because it's emotional content. It's fake, maybe it gets even to be fake news, but it has an addictive psychological attraction that will keep you on the page longer.
There's a emerita Harvard professor, Shoshana Zuboff, has coined the term surveillance capitalism.
Well, that's certainly true.
So let's talk a little bit about that business model. I mean, is part of the problem just virality? I mean, the fact that it's all about the eyeballs and the clicks, and we'll put whatever content we need to keep you clicking and watching?
I think that is the problem. The internet was created to be something else, and people didn't have an imagination for how it could be used in a bad way. And then it was sort of too late to put the toothpaste back in the tube and reinvent it with more safeguards. And people wanted to have a place where anybody could speak about anything. And so it was a very democratizing force. But then you had the business models plus bad guys trying to do bad things, steal your information, play tricks on you to make money and that sort of thing. So it is it's by and large without regulation. So here in this country, you have not only the First Amendment, which safeguards government interference in what we want to say, or anyone else can say, but it's also unregulated, in part because the regulators, members of Congress, are still far behind where technology actually is, and you saw that during the really pathetic questioning of Mark Zuckerberg by members of Congress about his platform, his business.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the First Amendment. That certainly impacts some of this stuff. I mean, it really comes out of kind of a 18th century Enlightenment model and the whole idea of the marketplace of ideas, right?
Right.
So Could it be argued that, well, this is just another platform for, we've enlarged the marketplace. It's now an online marketplace of ideas.
Right. And, fundamentally, I think everybody supports that, but even the First Amendment has some limits to it. You cannot advocate killing somebody and organizing around that fact in the United States. You can advocate just about everything else. And so what if you have a platform that says that you cannot advocate hate, or hate equals violence against somebody, and yet they don't police that? So, or they police it poorly, which is what the Facebook and Twitter cases is. They try to take things down, but they don't have enough people to take them down. They say that their machines, through artificial intelligence, will learn to spot this in the same way that they learn to spot terrorist content and images, where now their AI machines can do this on scale. And maybe someday, and Zuckerberg and others say this could happen if they work at it hard enough, that within 5 or 10 years, the machines will be able to take down hate speech. What Facebook is doing, and we saw this when we visited them, is it's kind of swinging from one pole to the other. Because it got so badly criticized during the election for not taking down clear hate speech and violence, advocating violence, it's now trying to regulate and censor what they call slang. And in English, slang changes from moment to moment, context to context, and you have to be very nuanced in how you judge what is slang in one country at any one time, but they are actually trying to do that.
Well, one of the regulatory pieces of the environment is the Communications Decency Act, and there's Section 230, which I can read in part here. No provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider. So that has really been a source of a fair amount of, I don't know if mischief is the right word, but certainly gives an out to the platform providers.
Yep.
To say, we're basically the electric company. We're a public utility. It's not our job.
Right. And in the beginning, everyone was on board with that idea, because the idea was to be able to create a platform where they were just moving your information around. They were moving what you said around, but didn't have to verify what you said. That would have crippled the companies that did this. Now it's allowed them to not be responsible for anything that moves around in their system, not be legally responsible for it. And I would argue maybe not even morally responsible for it. It's allowed them to do one other thing, which maybe they didn't intend to do, which is to pretty much wipe out the business model for mainstream media, and even not mainstream, fringe media, because they can take our content. Actually, we gave them our content when our business model fell apart in the mid-2000s, 2008. We said, Facebook, please help us put our content on your system. And it worked. People were finding it that way. But what happened was Facebook started selling ads that would go next to what I am paid by the Washington Post to do. And the Washington Post didn't get those ads.
Nor have any control over which ads they were. Right?
Exactly. So it really broke. It helped further damage the business model of the news media everywhere in the United States and across the globe. And so that's another byproduct of Section 230.
So how would it work if we were to hold them more responsible? Is there any viable way you could say, okay, Mark Zuckerberg, you need to be policing what you're putting on your platform?
Well, actually, Europe is doing that. And while it's called the GDPR, don't ask me to tell you what all those letters mean, but it is a regulation that most of the European countries have signed on to that forces Facebook to act in a certain way if it wants to continue to act in those countries. And since it does, it's a big market for Facebook, it abides by those. And it regulates content more tightly, hate speech more tightly. It also requires them to get rid of bots, these automated characters that move content around to make it look like, oh, you're really popular, when in fact you've just bought a bunch of little machines that are on the web pretending to be people. One of the really fascinating things that they do in Europe is they don't allow, or the political parties have agreed not to use bots. So bots are used in political campaigns and in selling products to make it look like they're more popular than they actually are. So that's outlawed. It's all sorts of things. So I would start by looking at what our European allies are doing. It's probably the closest thing. But the other thing is some kind of forced transparency. How do those algorithms, which is the machinery that takes what it knows about you and then gives you back content that would most attract you, and not
keep you clicking,
to keep you
and
clicking,
looking at the ads,
and becoming more emotional about it, either happy or sad or angry, so that again you'll keep at it, and that's what drives people to the corners. All of that is mysteriously done in a black box that is kind of their secret sauce. And so one idea is to make that more transparent so that you know what's happening to you. But also, what about all the information about you? Did you really give Facebook or the other big tech monopolies the approval to know as much as it does about you?
Well, this is sort of the more mundane motivation of money. What about these malign actors that we started talking about at the top of the show here, and we'll take Russia and the upcoming election. What kinds of things are likely to still be out there?
Well, because we're in the United States, where the First Amendment is so strong, and there's no regulation, and elections are decentralized, our election systems are decentralized and in the hands of not only states but counties, it's going to be all the experts say there's going to be more disinformation. Some of it will be the same ads, but it will be more carefully hidden who's the hand behind it. And then other things that we really haven't seen yet, so we can't predict. But the good thing is, so there's nobody who is an authority, a government authority, that's able to do much about this, given what it is and given how our laws are written against government interference, against the First Amendment, for example. But there are a lot more researchers in academia and journalists who are looking for signs of what's happening. And all of those people have learned a lot from the 2016 election and the things that went on before. So there are a lot more groups out there now who have real-time collection of this information and are trying to make the public aware. There's media literacy programs that try to make students and others understand what fake news is or how to verify news and that sort of thing.
Well, something you've written about elsewhere as kind of an example of what's going on, and that is some of the activities around the election in Maryland.
Yes.
And voter suppression efforts.
Yes.
In a sort of obscure way.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that.
Well, I have a class every semester it's an advanced reporting class, and last semester the students were tasked to investigate Russian disinformation in Maryland. And their eyes were wide. They're, what? Well, it turns out that Congress had given a number of experts all this information from Facebook and Twitter to analyze and to see what had happened during the election. And one of the fascinating things they found was that in Maryland and Missouri had the largest number of Russian bot Facebook ads. And that's because of the police shooting of Michael Brown and Freddie Gray in Baltimore. And what the ads did not talk about Trump versus Clinton directly, because we know that the Russians wanted to get Trump elected. What they did is they tried to heighten division between the black and white communities, more specifically the black and police communities. And so they funded both sides. They funded anti-police brutality, pro-police, and mainly their message was that African American communities, you have so many issues, this power structure does not serve you, you should just stay home and don't vote. It was a voter suppression method that did play out in Baltimore. The African American vote was lower than it had been previously. And by the way, the same thing happened in Wisconsin. So they targeted the African American community in Wisconsin with messages of hopelessness, racial division, and the message was don't go to the polls, because they thought, you being a swing state, that this actually could change the needle on the election.
Fascinating stuff, something to watch in the coming months. Dana Priest, thank you so much for being with us.
It's great to be here.
Viewers, we'll see you next time on International Focus.
This program is made possible in part by the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, one of America's top research universities, preparing students for today's interdependent world with internationally focused academic and outreach programs.